Some of the most influential letters ever written weren't composed in a quiet study or some grand hall. Nope, they were written from behind bars. Today, we're going to dive into a fascinating historical puzzle, figuring out exactly where the Apostle Paul was when he penned the letters that would literally shape the course of history.
It's a powerful question, right? How, from a place of confinement and total uncertainty, could words emerge with such lasting power? That's really the heart of what we're exploring today, the incredible context behind these extraordinary documents.
Okay, so first things first, let's meet our main subject. In the New Testament, there's a special group of letters known as the prison epistles, and they're called that for a pretty simple reason. Paul himself makes it crystal clear that he's locked up while he's writing them.
These are the main four that scholars group together under this heading: Philippians, Colossians, Ephesians, and Philemon. Each one carries its own unique message for sure, but they all share the same dramatic backdrop of being written from inside a prison.
And get this, if you include his later letter, 2 Timothy, that means at least 5 books of the New Testament were written while Paul was a prisoner. That's a huge chunk of his writings, all composed while he had no freedom. Now this is so key to understanding Paul's mindset. He doesn't call himself a prisoner of Rome or a prisoner of Caesar. He sees himself as the prisoner of Christ Jesus. For him, his imprisonment wasn't some criminal punishment. It was a direct consequence and even a continuation of his mission.
But this is where our central mystery kicks in. For all he says about his circumstances, Paul never explicitly writes, "Greetings from my prison cell in Rome," or any other city for that matter. The exact location is left out, which has created a real-life historical detective story for scholars.
So how do you solve a puzzle like this? If the text doesn't just give you the answer, you have to become a detective. You look for clues, subtle references, historical context, and you use the process of elimination. We have to piece together the evidence hidden right there in the letters themselves.
All right, so let's put on our detective hats and start examining the potential locations, one by one. We'll weigh the evidence for and against each, just like historians have been doing for centuries.
First up, a candidate that sometimes gets thrown around is Ephesus. It was a major city where Paul spent a lot of time and had a really significant ministry. So on the surface, it seems like a logical possibility.
But the case for Ephesus falls apart pretty much immediately. There's simply no biblical record, none whatsoever, that Paul was ever even imprisoned there. Without any textual support, it's a really tough theory to defend, so we gotta set that one aside and look elsewhere.
Okay, our next suspect, Caesarea, is a much stronger contender. We know for a fact from the book of Acts that Paul was indeed held as a prisoner there for a pretty significant amount of time.
But here's the major inconsistency. In his letter to the Philippians, Paul talks about a potential life-or-death outcome hanging in the balance. But during his known imprisonment in Caesarea, there just wasn't that kind of immediate threat. The emotional tone of the letter doesn't quite match his known situation there. So the search continues.
And this is where the detective work gets really exciting. The solution to this whole mystery starts to unfold when we take a closer look at one crucial word Paul uses: praetorium. Now, the word praetorium has a double meaning. It can refer to a physical place, like a governor's palace, but it can also refer to a specific group of people, the elite, 9,000-men imperial guard stationed in Rome to protect the emperor.
And just look at how Paul uses it here. He says his situation has become known throughout the whole praetorium. He's talking about his story spreading among people, not just echoing through a building. This is our first huge clue, pointing directly to the imperial guard in Rome. And then, we get the clincher. At the end of that same letter, Paul sends greetings from believers who are part of Caesar's household. I mean, that's an undeniable link. He's in a place where he has direct contact with people connected to the imperial court itself. There's only one location where all of these clues line up.
So, based on those two massive pieces of evidence, the reference to the Praetorian Guard and the greetings from Caesar's household, the conclusion becomes pretty clear. Paul was writing from the very heart of the empire.
And this is the consensus among the vast majority of scholars. The clues point overwhelmingly to his first imprisonment in Rome, which places the writing of these letters somewhere around 60 to 62 AD. With the location finally pinned down, we can now explore the deeper meaning of all this.
But, knowing he was in Rome is really only half the story. The real power comes from understanding how he viewed his situation right there in the heart of the empire. This matters because Paul's perspective changes the whole narrative from one of tragedy to one of triumph.
He saw himself as an ambassador in chains. Think about that. An ambassador's job is to represent their king. So even in prison, even facing a potential death sentence, Paul believed he was exactly where he was supposed to be, representing his faith to the most powerful people in the world, from the guards all the way up to Caesar's own household. His Roman prison cell had become his mission field.
And that leaves us with a pretty profound question to reflect on. Paul's story shows that purpose isn't defined by our circumstances, but by our perspective. It challenges us to ask, in the middle of our own trials and our own limitations, where might we find a deeper mission that we've never seen before?